What's wrong with me? Can't even do an intro. What's crack-a-lackin', my jack-packin' kraken? So today we're talking about something very, very underrated, training longevity. This is super important and I just don't hear it talked about very much. So if you want to live forever, figuratively speaking, definitely the video for you. We're going to go over 20 top tips, just the tips, to keep you healthy.
Just a tip, just for a second, just to see how it feels.
The first is going to be to respect the iron. If you look at someone who's been lifting 10, 20, 30, 40 years, when they approach a lift, even just a warm-up, it is a very, very different experience than from an 18-year-old. The 18-year-old is like, come on, yeah, let's fucking grip, dip, grip, and rip, shit, and grip, and rip. And the older guy is like, he actually approaches things in a very methodical way. He checks to see if his positioning is good, everything like that. So it is a very different mentality. And you could crush 100 lifts in a row, then the 101st, the iron crushes you, or the rubber, or the styrofoam, or whatever. So make sure that you respect the iron and do things in the right way, especially with regards to your technique. Second is going to be exercise selection. Now, there are no bad exercises on the whole, but for an individual, certainly there might be some lifts that just take more out of you, that beat up the joints, the body, the soul more than others. So if a particular lift gives you troubles repeatedly despite good form, reasonable programming, etc., there's no shame in just not doing that lift. For example, if you're a taller guy and barbell back squats don't seem to train your legs very much, a lot of the tension goes to the back, perhaps you're getting disc issues or lower back pain, there's no harm in doing front squats, in doing single leg work, that kind of thing, machines, leg press, etc., just to train the area that you want to train. Not every person can or should do every single lift. Number 3 is going to be training to failure. As you get older, I've noticed a lot of people go from this one set to failure mentality to doing multiple sets not quite as close to failure. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you are honest about where you are actually in proximity to failure. Failure is not needed for strength increases or muscle growth. It can have its time and place, especially for some exercises, but it is never necessary, and especially if that kind of thing increases your recovery time, it might not be worth doing, especially as your training age increases. Number 4 is going to be mobility work. As you age, as you sit at your desk at your shitty corporate job, or if you're a YouTuber and you use your computer for 12 or 14 hours a day, some things start to just tighten up, and mobility work might be something you need to start doing. Young people, often not as necessary, but as you get older, it might become necessary. However, it should be tailored to you, an individual. If you find you're getting a lot of butt wink and lower back pain, perhaps some ankle or hip mobility might help you get into a better squat position. But I think overdoing the prehab side of things is something that you shouldn't be doing. I see a lot of people, their warm-up is as long as their workout. That is something where it's probably excessive and not needed. On the flip side, warming up longer might be a good thing. If you're younger, you might not need very much warm-up. As you age, you might find that you need longer to warm up, especially on the big lifts. It's not uncommon for me to take 5, 6, 7 warm-up sets to get ready for a top set of squats. That's just how long it takes me to warm up. It's better to warm up too much than not enough. The only bad thing about warming up too much is you might be slightly weaker on the main lift if you do too high reps, too many sets, etc. But if you're just a normal person training and you're not a power lifter, there's nothing wrong with being 2, 3, 4% weaker on the main lift, especially if it keeps you healthy. It's important to go by feel. If you ever feel like, maybe I need an extra warm-up before the set, just take it. I've had times where I loaded my working set on the bar and it didn't feel quite right going into that lift. I took weight back off the bar and did another warm-up set. Yeah, it looked weird to other people in the gym. Who gives a shit, okay? If it feels bad, don't do it. Similarly, while it's important to have goals, they should be individual and personalized to you. I've had clients who say, people smaller than me can lift more. I've also had clients say, I'm smaller than other people, and yet I can lift more. And to both of them, the grass is greener on the other side. What you have to realize is that strength in particular, as well as size, they are both individual. And just because you see someone, deadlift 700 pounds on the internet, that doesn't really automatically have an effect on what you should be doing. It might be inspirational, it might be a comparison, but it shouldn't really affect your training. Next, I think as you get a little bit older, it makes sense to take a more moderate approach to rep ranges. Which is going to be more likely to injure you? A 1 rep max, a 3 rep max, or a 10 or a 12 rep max? I would say, generally speaking, you get injured more often with the heavier weights and the lower rep maxes. And in terms of building your strength, going for a 6 rep max, you probably get more benefit than a 1 rep max. And from a stimulus to fatigue ratio or risk to reward ratio, a more moderate rep range just makes more sense in almost every single way. Unless you're about to peak for a competition, and maybe not even then, it doesn't really make sense to do a 1 or a 2 or a 3 rep max. Stick to slightly lighter weight, not like 50% of your 1 rep max, but 70 to 80, maybe 85%, perhaps 90%. I think that just makes more sense than a 95, 100, 105% type of effort. Next, don't be afraid to take time off if you need to. And I don't mean like a day off, I mean a week or even 2 weeks. I take 1 to 2 weeks off 1 to 2 times per year. I go back to my wife's home in Hunan province, and I basically don't go to the gym for a week or even 2 weeks. Yes, I'm slightly weaker when I come back, but I think in terms of long-term progress, it doesn't actually have any negative effect. And it might actually have a positive effect because after that 1 to 2 weeks, my motivation is absolutely sky high. I'm completely recovered, joints feel 100%, all that kind of stuff, and I can progress forward even more quickly than before. Next, tempo training. Now, I'm not a huge believer in time under tension. I actually did a full video debunking that up above, but I do think taking a more controlled tempo, controlling the eccentric, maybe a slight pause, still should have maximum effort on the concentric, but just taking an overall more controlled approach can keep you training longer. If you look at someone like Branch Warren and they're just flailing all over the place and it's all cheated reps and half reps and partials and it just looks like a goddamn mess, I think that definitely has a higher risk of injury.
It's been a tough season for Branch. He didn't do nearly what he wanted to do at the Olympia. But in my eyes, that's actually a good thing. Every time Branch doesn't really rise up to his expectations, he's going to make up for it. He's going to come back. And he's going to try a lot harder. He is a pit bull. He's a warrior. He's an overcomer. This guy's overcome so many injuries, so many career-ending injuries, and come back and achieve a goal that was near impossible.
Yeah, so if you have to strap into your cable row, it might be too heavy. I'm not saying this kind of training isn't effective. Clearly, they built pretty impressive physiques doing this kind of very, very cheated, sloppy, every day is hip day kind of training. However, it does beat you up a lot more, and as you get older, you will absolutely 100% get injured if you train like this on a regular basis. And this isn't hate on Branch Warren or Johnny Jackson. Clearly, they put a ton of effort into their training. But if you want to maximize your longevity and you want to avoid injury, this kind of training is probably the absolute worst thing you can do and really is not going to be effective in terms of optimizing your risk to reward. It just does not make sense. So don't do it. Number 10, gear. Now, I think some people think that a belt is going to be massively helpful in terms of injury prevention. There's not really a whole lot of data out there on that. I did a full video on that above. But I think if it seems like it helps you, you get sort of a placebo effect, which I might have just ruined, then I think it can help. If you see a lot of older lifters, a lot of them do use belts. I think knee sleeves, knee wraps, wrist wraps, head wraps, just wrap your body like a mummy and you'll be fine. Now that's a MILF. Number 11, pain equals bad. Now, is it that simple? No. Pain is very, very complicated. I'll do a full video on that in the future. It is not as simple as pain equals bad. But in practical terms, it kind of is that simple. If you are getting knee pain, that's not something you should train through. You can modify the movements, you can reduce the volume, you can reduce the intensity, you can add a pause, but you need to do something because just blindly charging on ahead does not end well. Ronnie Coleman, he trained through pain for years and years and years. Again, it didn't end well. Speaking of that, number 12 is avoid injury or damage. it can accumulate over time. You might not even think it's accumulating, you might not have any symptoms, and then one day you wake up and just boom, something snaps and you can't even do a certain movement anymore. There are a lot of people who cannot bench press anymore, or squat anymore, or deadlift anymore. To them, some movements, they have just expired because they either did them incorrectly or with too heavy loading, or they didn't periodize their training enough, etc. So I think it's important to realize this can happen. And if you do get an injury, and it's going to happen eventually, almost certainly, learn from that experience. Treat it as a learning experience, and it can actually be a positive thing.
You know, this guy's overcome so many injuries, so many career-ending injuries.
Okay, almost no one has a very long lifting career and completely avoids injury. At some point, especially if you're lifting heavy, hard, with high effort and progressively overloading, you're going to meet that wall of injury. What you do about it is very, very important. Number 13 is modifying movements. There's no movement that you must do in the gym. And if any particular movement always causes you issues, sometimes even just a small modification can help a lot. So let's say the deadlift always gives you back pain. Sumo, rack pull. There are lots of options that can help you work around that. I think it's better to work around it than just completely avoiding a movement pattern. On the other hand, if you keep doing the same movement and it keeps messing you up, and you keep doing the same movement over and over and over again, that is literally the definition of insanity. So take a middle ground. Don't completely avoid a movement pattern. Don't completely keep doing the same movement. Modify it. Use a similar but different movement enough to stay healthy. 14, hydration, recovery, sleep, food, diet, all these things. They become more important as you age, especially if you want to maintain a somewhat lean physique. People tend to just get fatter as they age. It's just sort of how things work. I think a lot of this is avoidable, but you're going to need to focus on the details a little bit more. A lot of 18-year-olds stay lean with zero effort or consideration or knowledge. That probably won't happen as you are 28, 38, 48, 58, etc. Even then, you'll probably need more recovery time. At 18, you can probably go drinking all the time and still progress at your lifting. But again, as you get older, you need more recovery time, and the details start to add up and become more important. So keep in mind that perhaps, a push-pull leg split or an upper lower, upper lower, upper lower, or a full body every day is fine when you are younger. But as you're older, you simply might need more time to recover, more days off, more attention to the RPE or the absolute loading, etc. So what worked when you are 20 probably won't work when you are 40. Number 16 is going to be explosive training. Now, I think it's something that can have great benefit, and I'm not saying not to do it. But especially as you age, I think it's something you have to be a little bit more careful with, because the risk of injury almost certainly does go up. That's not data. There's no study that I have to support that. It's just anecdotal and seeing a lot of people train. Similarly, number 17 is cardio, specifically running. Some people run into their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. The age group records are very, very impressive. However, running definitely takes a toll over time, especially if you are a larger person. So if you're above 200 pounds for a guy, realize that running definitely adds up over time, and I think it's important to manage your volume, your mileage, etc. to make sure you can run over a long period of time. Plus strengthening all the supporting muscles around the knees, the glute medius, etc., around the Achilles, that can help to keep you injury-free. Number 18 is range of motion. Now this sort of goes both ways with the recent trend of bulletproofing. A lot of these movements, they go into that extreme range of motion. So the knees over the toes, or like the elbow in a way stretched position, etc., or like a really deep fly or something like that, to strengthen the joint, to strengthen that potentially weak part of the range of motion. I do think this has value, but especially as you get older, you really do need to start light with any of these new bulletproofing movements, and you do need to progress very slowly, just because those areas take more time to adapt than the muscles do. Similarly, I think in some cases, using a partial range of motion might make a little more sense. If you find that locking out your Bulgarian split squats causes knee pain, perhaps don't do that little end part of the range of motion. Some people have asked me, like, why don't you do that last little part of the squat? I'm just standing there with my knees ever so slightly bent. It's because it's more comfortable. I don't want to stand there with completely locked knees because that just doesn't feel very comfortable. Which leads me to number 19, know thyself. So you need to be able to take many different sources of information, but apply them to yourself. This requires thought, this requires personal experience. You can get sources of information, but don't just blindly follow them. Whether it's prehab, whether it's programming, anything. It needs to be viewed through the lens of your own experience. And this in particular goes with science. If you read a study and it goes completely against your own experience, keep an open mind, but realize that it's just a study. And the participants of that study are going to be in a bell curve. If you're in the middle, the study might apply to you. But if you're on the extreme, on either end, that study might have zero practical information for you. So know yourself. And that goes even with this video. Out of the 20 factors in this video, some of them will apply to more people than others, and some of them might not apply to you at all. So it's important to take these and realize this is just speaking in very general terms. And some of them will definitely apply, but not all of them will. Finally, number 20, motivation. Now, motivation is something that I have not really struggled with and thus have not really talked about on this channel, but I realize a lot of people do. I would say make your training as enjoyable as possible. Don't try to have your willpower raised to the level of training. Try to make the training as enjoyable as possible. Yes, some things are not as enjoyable as others, and it won't always be a walk in the park. But on some level, you should look forward to your training. It should be motivational. It could be a competition. It could be just a particular PR that you want to hit or a particular lift that you want to improve. But I think maintaining this motivation over many, many, many years is something that not a lot of people achieve. And it should be the ultimate goal of training, to keep being able to train. All right, that's all for this video. Make sure to diddle that like button, show the notifications a good time as well, and I will see you in the next video. Peace. Right hand